Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search marketing and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is Mark Smith, a newly minted Handshake Domain investor and advocate, and the founder of Namesake.Domains, a consultancy aimed at helping brands adopt and develop their Handshake domain. Today, Mark and I discuss how launching fitness and SaaS companies led him to discover domain investing and then Handshake Domains. Mark and I also discuss the ins and outs of Handshake Domain investing and development, as well as common Handshake Domain use cases, including how Mark became the Handshake Domain Registry of .gen. Mark also shares insight in regards to the feasibility and interoperability of Handshake and legacy domain ecosystems, reimagining the future of Web 3.0. And finally, we discuss the nitty-gritty details in getting started with the buying, selling, and auctioning of Handshake Domain. And so with that, Mark, welcome, and thank you for making time to join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Alvin.
Yeah, certainly, man. So to kick things off, Mark, let's briefly share at a high level with our listeners a bit about yourself, who you are, your personal and professional background.
Yeah. So my professional background is I've been in sales and service in state government, financial industry, and insurance for about the last 10 years. I've been kind of a hobbyist domainer for a few years and was keeping track of cryptocurrency for a few years after 2017. And about a year ago, I stumbled on Handshake, got really invested and interested in the space, and have been really active and involved in building that out ever since.
That is awesome. So wait, what do you mean by like you're a domain hobbyist? Like, how did you get introduced to domains?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I initially was interested in personal training. Fitness has been, a personal hobby and interest of mine pretty much my entire life. And I knew that I wanted to have some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor in my life in general. And that seemed like a natural fit initially. Mm-hmm. And so when I was diving into that, it was obviously one of the first steps of starting a business is looking for a domain name. And this was around 2014 when a lot of the new top level domains were coming out, and I discovered .fitness. And it was really striking to me because at that point, like a lot of people, I was only familiar with, like .com, .net, and so on. Also, with so many names being taken already, I was able to find one under a .fitness. And as I was sharing that out with some of my friends and family, I got a lot of positive feedback about it. They were also intrigued by the minimalism of it, having like the brand .industry format for the domain. And from there, I started seeing that, there was thousands of other domains available or top level domains. And I saw that there was a lot of brands that didn't have their extensions. So I started looking for ways to build a business on that, recognizing that it was probably a lot more scalable than a fitness consultation business or service. And so I started developing values.feedback in order to issue subdomains on like a WordPress multi-site like target.values.feedback. And just as I was about to launch that, COVID hit. And at almost the exact same time, I discovered Handshake, where I could literally be a registry and issue left of the dot and also acquire a lot more names right of the dot. And from there, I've been accumulating those and developing them since then.
That's crazy. So you stumble up on .fitness, and then essentially, I guess to say the least, you become like a TLD or top level domain consultant somewhat, and then that just kind of led you into the land of, I guess, crypto and Handshake.
Yeah, actually, I bought my first Satoshis on Valentine's of last year when I had gotten back from vacation. I discovered Handshake while on vacation, and I wasn't in a place where I could verify with my phone number, so I was a couple days late. Today is actually the 1-year anniversary of the first name that was made available for auction on Namebase, which is really exciting. So then a few days later, on the 14th of February last year, bought that, got my first Handshake, and have been exploring the larger crypto space since then. But Handshake remains my primary focus because I think that domains in general are a very unique asset, and having that combined with a cryptocurrency or putting that utility on a blockchain is just absolutely like mind blowing to me. It's kind of a perfect fit, really. And It's also interesting because we've seen both of these things play out before. We've seen the .com land rush. We've seen the growth of Bitcoin, which Handshake is a fork of. And so to have both of these combined into a single ecosystem, along with that historical perspective, I think makes for a really interesting opportunity.
And so you get interested into Handshake Domains and all within the less of the year. Now you have a company, Namesake Domains or Namesake.Domains. And so like tell us a little bit of how did that get started?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I got into Handshake in the first week of the auction, which was February of 2020, and I spent a lot of time kind of lurking in the Discord community. Actually, I didn't even join that until several months later. I was mostly just prospecting different names. Being that I was interested in the general top-level domain space, I was very familiar with what existed, but I was also familiar with what didn't exist. And obviously, if you look through the names that are currently available within the ICANN space, you'll start to pick up trends. For instance, there's a .wine, a .vodka, .beer, but there wasn't, specific spirits like a .gin. And so I was lucky enough to win the auction for that over the summer. And I realized that if I really wanted to have a successful registry and to be able to make something of these domains, I needed to put together a good brand. And so again, being that a lot of the initial names that I wanted were taken for .coms and otherwise, and also because the entire premise of Handshake is having these new top-level domains, Namesake.Domains seemed like a perfect fit for me. And so I acquired that name and started building a site on it, and have been slowly putting out content to help other people understand Handshake and promote some of the domains that I've acquired since then.
That is awesome. So, you pretty much have become a self-study then in terms of Handshake Domains and just decentralized domains in general.
Yeah, it's, I had the advantage of, doing a lot of thinking and researching in the legacy domain space prior to that, or at least for a few years, kind of learning how DNS works in general. And again, researching the space, what names were popular and why for the new top level domains. So I felt like a fish in water really when I started getting the hang of Handshake. But yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve. Thankfully, now there's a lot more people involved in the space. There's some really exciting developments that are making it more accessible for other people with, like resolvers like Puma browser on Android and iOS to be able to access these, and Namebase releasing things like D-Links, which is like a decentralized link tree. So you can immediately use these names without any real technical knowledge. So that's been really exciting to watch grow. But yeah, it was definitely a self-study for a long time.
And what's interesting is now you would not consider yourself really a technical person in terms of being like a software engineer, a developer, or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did have like a small amount of HTML and other experience with like MySpace. I grew up with that. And so I think that also kind of got me interested in that. But I definitely don't have any extensive or formal development education or experience. Mostly, I like domains because of the opportunity that they give you to really leverage your unique perspective and how you interpret context of words. Like different words mean different things to different people depending on where you are or what your background is. And Handshake really magnifies that. I mean, that already existed within domains in general, but with Handshake now you can have top level domains in other languages. And so we're seeing a rise in, Korean, Russian, Mandarin, etc., with Punycode top level domains. And it's like, I don't speak any of those languages. And so people from more diverse backgrounds, I think, really have an exceptional advantage here.
So then in terms of some of our listeners that, have tuned in and they're like, I'm 10 minutes into this thing and I still don't know if these brothers are talking about handshaking with their hands or dapping or what's going on. So let's take a quick step back now. In terms of Handshake, like, let's explain or have you explain the difference in Handshake domain versus, I guess, the legacy domain as what we know today. So let's take, for instance, there is a .Alvin Brown that's in Handshake, and there's also a alvinbrown.com. Like, what is the difference in terms of the infrastructure? What's different about where we are with the legacy system versus where Handshake will likely take us?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the current internet as we know it is essentially controlled by a very small set of organizations. And in terms of the root zone where ownership of things like .com happens, it's really regulated and controlled by a single organization, which is ICANN. And that's been necessary for a long time. Like with just the tools that we had available and how the internet grew, it was necessary to have kind of a single point of control to really make sure that there was order and things didn't break down or descend into chaos. However, that has started causing some problems, for instance, with certificate authorities that maintain the security of the internet. When you put all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, if something breaks, it has really far-reaching implications. And so recognizing this, a group of developers designed Handshake to help distribute the ownership of the underlying infrastructure of the internet itself to actual internet users. And so instead of having a single company like VeriSign that owns .com and several other top-level domains, and having a single regulatory body, the regulation is basically code. So it's an algorithm or a protocol that determines how names are issued, in this case, in auction, that anybody can bid on a top-level domain over the course of 5 days in a public auction to make it fair. All of the names were released from February of 2020 to February of 2021, so they weren't just all available all at once, and somebody could go in and just take all of them. So that helped to ensure that there was a much greater distribution of the top-level domains. And instead of paying a fee of $185,000 for an application that ICANN requires to have a top-level domain during the periods that they're even accepting those, which they haven't for some years, and then subsequently paying an additional, I believe it's $25,000 annually altogether for maintaining that, you could potentially win an auction for free if nobody else bids against you and have a top-level domain, in this case, like .Alvin Brown, they're able to work with and own it outright for free. So I would say that the Handshake is to domains what Bitcoin has been to money. It's essentially doing the same thing with disintermediating the centralized control over those, just in a different context, in this case, domains.
That is excellent because, when I think about just the overall use case, and obviously I'm just getting introduced into it as well, but it's almost as if I look and I say, I'm like, man, whatever you can do with the legacy domain, to a certain extent, you can do the same thing with a Handshake domain. While I will caveat that to say that things are still developing, because I even think this week we just saw, and I think you retweeted it or posted on Twitter, that there was the first Handshake email that was sent this week.
Yeah, that was a really exciting development. I know there's been some debate as to whether or not that was officially the first one, but that's the first proof that I've seen in terms of a screenshot that was shared out. And I shared that, and it was, I think, the most engagement I've ever had on a tweet, which was awesome. But and rightfully so. Neil, one of our community members, shared that out, and that's a monumentous milestone for us to hit as the first email, because for a while I was using the analogy of, if you have some doubts about the utility of Handshake, look at what Michael Saylor did with domains when he was first getting started. Like he was talking with Andrew Rosner about, when he was buying names, you could only email with them. You couldn't set up a website yet. And so he was buying names based on that context, and maybe, thinking down the road, you could have a page. And ours was the exact opposite. You could set up a page almost immediately, including integrating with WordPress, but you couldn't send an email. And so, again, we've seen this story play out before. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So I had also been buying names, assuming that email would become a thing eventually. I didn't think it would be this fast, but it's been really encouraging to see the developments happening a lot faster than anticipated. And I'm looking forward to the first official email service for that as well.
Now let's juxtapose the legacy domains versus the Handshake domains. Now, in terms of one, obviously with legacy, yes, you can go and become a registry, but like you said, that's gonna cost you an application fee of $185,000 at minimum. That doesn't even get us into if someone else also has interest and we get into auction, and that's just a whole different, sort of thing. So yeah, you can go out and be a registry, but you have to be ICANN accredited. Got it. But then if you come to the consumer side in terms of whether you're a domain hobbyist or a domain investor or just an end user, obviously there is the ability to register a domain name, whether it's .com or any other TLD. But the reality is with what we've been built on the current infrastructure, you really don't own that name. You're only leasing that name on a given year, and in some cases you can be that name can be taken away from you. How is that different with Handshake?
It's an excellent question. I would also like to touch on something you said initially about the ICANN accreditation. You're right in that, paying the $185,000 really just kind of opens the door to possibility. But an interesting case on that and the value of top level domains is Amazon, which has been fighting half of South America in court for about the last decade for .amazon over who controls the context. And I think that that's important to note because when you own a top level domain, that's kind of the maximum amount of ownership of a context of a word or symbol on the internet. If you think about how much of our life, especially post COVID, is transitioning to the online world, that's really the primary space now. And so if you own a word there, it's like owning the word itself. It's almost like Plato's forms, right? And so they still don't have .amazon. I think they're supposed to settle in court soon, but that's taken, one of the most powerful companies in the world within the ICANN space, again, nearly a decade against several countries to get that done. And so in that case, they would own that name unless, of course, ICANN stepped in and possibly regulated that. But you're right. When you own a .com, which is especially with the increase in deplatforming on social media sites where you really don't own your profile. So if you get kicked off one of those, the thought has been, well, as long as you have your .com, you're still good. You own that. But you don't really. As you mentioned, the registry, in this case, VeriSign for .com, or the registrar like GoDaddy or 101 Domain or something like that, can still cut off service to your name. They're cooperating with authorities, or in some cases, even if they just don't like what you're doing with the site. I myself have had some of my pre-registrations, like when .new is being released by Google, I tried pre-registering what's .new just because I thought it was a fun name. I again liked kind of putting phrases and words together, and that ended up getting denied, even though I was the first one that found it, because Google apparently wanted to use that. If you go to what's .new now, that's their homepage for the .new extension, which is flattering, but also kind of irritating that ended up getting taken away. And so that was another driver that took me toward Handshake, where you again, own it like you own Bitcoin. When you own something on the protocol, it's a decentralized protocol and a public blockchain. No one person, entity, or organization controls that ledger of ownership. It's kind of like a register of deeds, but there is no city or council that's controlling that register. It's operated on miners, which are specialized computers that anyone can set up in their home and run to chip in computational power to the network. And so there are thousands of redundant copies of this ledger. And so there's no way for somebody to go in and unilaterally make an edit to that. Once you own something, you own it, and the entire network knows that you own it. And unless you sign it with your account, you transfer the name, or the network can verify that you have transferred that ownership. You own that regardless of what anybody else thinks about it. And I think that has a lot of valuable application when it comes to things like journalism, for example, or research that we've seen some websites being taken down by the government or other entities. And so I suspect that is going to become a much more crucial part of society if that trend continues.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it certainly invites the conversation, to Handshake Domains, because what I didn't, I did an interview with Mike Carson and Steve Webb not too long ago, just about Handshake, and kind of got up to speed, but really didn't hit the ground running until roughly about a week and a half or so ago, when I realized, I was like, oh yeah, it's February. I think my name is probably coming up to be real. I'm like, man, I need to get it together. So interesting enough, I got set up on Namebase.io, went out, created my account, and then figured out, I saw that there were two options in terms of funding the account, which is BTC or Bitcoin, and then USD, but USD was grayed out. And so I was like, well, I'm not into Bitcoin, so I don't know how I'm going to get this thing funded. Matter of 24 hours, was told, hey, the account's approved for USD. Great. Get it approved. And it was kind of like off to the races, but it was off to the races of riding a new bicycle for the first time. And so, it was a bit of a wobbly experience for me from a certain lens of being a legacy domain investor. I say that because what's interesting is that while Handshake Domains does sound complicated to the person that is not involved in tech, it is actually pretty easy to get involved in the community and be able to, make sense of the Handshake use cases, whether it's redirects, D-links, what else? I think you said setting up websites on Handshake and WordPress, and I believe you can also with Heroku. What else? Skynet. I mean, there's just really, really many developments that are occurring. Now, one thing that I want to go back to that you mentioned is obviously you can use a Handshake domain really as a website as you currently use it in terms of the legacy system. And in terms of like going to an alvinbrown.com, I could use .alvinbrown, or I could just use alvinbrown / obviously I'm going to need something like NextDNS, a resolver of some sort. But that being said, you could either use this as a primary residence for a website, or you could talk about, becoming a registry. And so with your use case of, I believe, .gen, like, how did you make that delineation of whether or not you were going to use, Gen for just a website or, ultimately becoming a registry? Like, what was your decision process in terms of thinking that through?
Yeah, it was really just copying the existing model. I mean, to me, it seems like the most obvious use case is to find names that you would be able to issue second level domains for, because then you have a practically infinitely scalable asset. I mean, it's like owning an apartment complex in the Matrix where there's no set limit of rooms, and you can, just there's no cost for scaling. So if you find a word with good history and good context, then that's a good term to set up. Again, I was just filling in the blanks. It's almost like the periodic table of elements. They when those initially set up mathematically, they realized that, hey, there's some elements missing here that should exist. And so I think Handshake really gives us the opportunity to go in and fill in those blanks in terms of what's missing from the ICANN world. So again, using the example of the .beer, .wine, .vodka, I knew that .gin, .rum, .tequila should exist. I won .gin, some other people won the other ones, again, distributing the critical infrastructure. And I also knew that gin has a 400-year plus history as an industry, and many brands have been experimenting with things like near field communication, where you can tap your phone against a bottle and it will launch a website or something else. And you can also there's also a few brands that are experimenting with AR or augmented reality labels, where you hover your phone over the label and it will animate or do something fun. And so that told me that while it's an old industry, they're also looking ahead. They're early adopters of technology, and so it seemed like a blockchain domain on .gin would be perfect.
Huh, that's interesting because of the fact that you're a registry. Now, I guess, do you operate the same as a registry? Like, do you have the ability to block or withhold, premium listing domains? Like, talk about that a little bit.
To an extent, yes. So Namebase was early on setting up partnerships with legacy registrars like 101 Domain and Circa.com and Gateway.io, which is notable because other decentralized domain platforms like Unstoppable Domains, which is on the Ethereum network, and some other previous alt-root projects have never hit that milestone. And that was actually something that Namebase accomplished before we even had email, which is also super exciting to me. So they currently have custody of the name. So in this case, at least with how the registry or registrar program is currently set up, the registrars have custody of my name and are able to issue those. I was able to set up some premium names. So for example, if you wanted to buy aviation.gin or like Beefeater, Tanqueray, Bombay, any of the other premium gin brands, those are all much more expensive than a standard registration. I didn't want everything to have a flat rate because then you get a land rush and that can compromise the integrity and quality of the name itself, being that in the context of .gin, every single second level domain can be assumed to be a brand. And so I didn't want them to be the most affordable possible name because of that. And so the base rate, I believe I set it around 225, 250. There may be a markup on, depending on which registrar you go through. And we have had a few sales of that, which I'm excited about. Again, being that it's so early, I honestly wasn't expecting that to happen and was okay with that not happening for some time, because I wanted to maintain the ability for brands to really register that and discourage somebody from just squatting on all of the names.
Now you mentioned the price. So is that in USD or?
Yeah, this is another thing that I think is really exciting about these names. And actually, let me back up. I realized I didn't answer one of your questions. I do not currently have the ability to revoke any names or to censor them. Or at least not that I am aware of. And if I did, that's not something that I would do anyway, because I believe that that contradicts the entire premise of the project, really.
Right.
So the second level domains, so something left of the .gin or any other name that you may have, if you're currently in the registrar program, is denominated in USD. So you can go to 101 domain in circa.com or gateway.io and buy Handshake second level domains right alongside a .com second level domain. So you can use a credit card, you'd sign up for it just the way you would any other name. And that brings me to one of the more exciting things I think about the project, which is that while the top level domains were issued over the course of the last year, and I know a lot of people may think, oh, well, some of the best names have been taken already, and I'm too late, I missed out on this project. I don't believe that's the case at all, because much like with .com, the registry, in the case of VeriSign for .com, does not actually capture the full extent of the value that they create, nor should they. So for example, each registration for a .com is approximately $10, and it depends where you go, if it's wholesale or not, etc. But then, people like Michael Saylor and others have sold .coms for 30 million or, several hundred thousand. And so obviously VeriSign's not getting a cut of that. They're not capturing that value. And so I think that the majority of the value of the top level domains are actually going to be in the secondary market, especially with places like gateway.io that's currently focusing exclusively on Handshake second level domains. So you can go there. Every name that you see there is a Handshake second level domain, and you can use a credit card. So really, to get exposure to these Handshake names and to acquire valuable names, you don't actually have to have any cryptocurrency at all, have any technical understanding. Again, you can just play with context, see something that you believe to be valuable or that you may want to develop a WordPress site or other site on yourself, go there, buy those, or hang on to them for a while and resell them in a secondary market. But it's kind of like a hard reset of the namespace itself. When .coms and other domains were first issued, I was in grade school. I was a kid. There's no way that I would have done that. Similarly with with some of when Bitcoin first came out, I was a senior in high school, and when I was first going into college, I didn't have really the understanding or the budget at the time to really get involved in that. And so I think I was too young to really capture the value of either of those or understand the opportunity, which is why I'm excited about this go around, because it's both of them fused into one. And I feel like I'm in a great place to do that.
No, that's awesome. And so before we get to the auction, or at least talking about the auction and how to get involved and how to get started and all that. So in terms of this registry business, so let's just say in my case with Senior Care, I could go out. I already have the name. It's already there within my account. And so what are the next steps? Am I going to a Namebase.io or am I going to a gateway.io? Kind of what's that next step in terms of becoming a registry?
Yeah, on the homepage of Namebase, there's a Google form that you can fill out to apply to the program to join the registrar program, which would make you an official registry in that you would be able to issue names on registrars, which in this case are still kind of a walled garden in that you have to apply via Namebase, you have to be accepted, or there has to be availability for that, and then you work with them to get those on each of the registrars that are currently partnered with them, and you can start setting your pricing for standard, what the renewal is, what the premiums are, premium names, and what those costs are, that kind of thing. Personally, I don't like setting too many premium names aside unless they're brand names or other trademark, that kind of thing, only because I think that it detracts from the treasure hunt that is most of the fun in domaining. And again, delivering that asymmetrical value to your buyers is how you're going to succeed as a registry. I think that that's really a best practice that's important for many people to understand. Like, yes, there are some really, really high level, high ticket price for some of the second level domains that are selling, but trying to do that straight from the registrar is just a non-starter, in my opinion. Like, you should be focused on economy of scale and setting a reasonable rate so that you can have that recurring revenue regardless of who the owner is or what the resale value is. And as a registry, that's going to be your best bet. But yeah, so right now that's the process for setting that up is applying through Namebase. And in the future, I envision that there will be a decentralized registrar where anybody can plug their top level domain in and basically grant access to what I imagine will be a system, a decentralized exchange of sorts that is operated by a DAO or a decentralized autonomous organization. So, multiple people within the space will have control over it. So no one single person or entity will have control over it, and anybody will be able to sell any of their second level domains for any price.
That is awesome. And so, to back up, so I know that most listeners are probably saying, okay, Alvin, you have .senior care, great. You can become a registrar, great. But now let's even just talk about how to even get started in terms of just the Handshake community, in terms of, just being able to secure a string. Like, let's talk a bit about that process and what it's like. And so obviously one thing that I want to say before, jumping into additional questions, Namebase.io has done a tremendous job in terms of just the onboarding, the videos, and making it all make sense for even a newcomer like myself, just to be able to grasp and to pick up. Now, one of the things that I will say is a bit challenging, and I have had my bumps and bruises, and I've licked my wounds of just trying to figure out a strategy of bidding in auction for strings. And so you mentioned earlier, not all the strings are released, but even so, it's not really the auctions don't necessarily work in the same as they do with the legacy auction. Actually, it seems like it's more of an elongated process of time. And so if I find a string that, I just said, hey, if I was looking at something like DN Dallas, so .dn Dallas, I could go to Namebase, go to domain search, put in DN Dallas, figure out, hey, that thing hasn't started an auction. Like, walk me from there at what's going to happen, and how do I get involved, or rather, how do I get involved in terms of trying to bid on that and actually win it?
Absolutely. So we'll start pretty much from inception here. If you first, obviously, in order to bid on any sort of top level domain or a string, as you referred to them as, you're going to need Handshake. And so to do that, you can either go through Namebase.io, which is what I've personally done, especially coming from zero cryptocurrency and a fairly moderate level of domain experience. They are kind of like Coinbase and GoDaddy mashed into one, right? However, they are a custodial exchange, which is what each of those are. And that may not be desirable to everyone. So if you're particularly concerned about that, or if you are more technically proficient, you can also use Bob Wallet, which is the custodial solution where you can trade Bitcoin into that and then interact with the protocol directly. In that case, you would need, when you bid, you'll need to reveal your own bid, which I'll get to in a second here, whereas Namebase does that automatically for you. And you're also able to set your own custom transaction fees. So that means that your bid will go in more or less faster than some potentially. But I don't think that necessarily gives them a massive competitive advantage. It would definitely be more so along the lines of whether or not you prefer a custodial solution or not. In this case, I've built a good relationship with the folks at Namebase, and I'm comfortable with the custodial solution for how easy they make everything. So if you're just getting started in all of that, I would definitely recommend going to namebase.io to, as you did, especially if you're stateside, use the USD on-ramp so that you're able to hook up your checking or savings account and buy Handshake directly with USD. That's been incredibly easy to do, and I was grateful to be part of the early on-ramp for that. So from there, let's say you throw a couple $100 in, you have some Handshake, you find the name as you mentioned. What you're going to want to do is first really consider if this is a name that you're excited about. If is this something that you're personally going to use? Is it something that you're going to want to set up second level domains on? Is this going to be a gift for somebody? Really figure out what the use is. What does the future of that name look like to you? And how excited are you by it? Because the more excited you are by that name and the more it fills you with this possibility and wonder, the better you're going to be able to develop that and really share that excitement with other people. The reason I say that is getting your initial bid correct is one of the most important things in my opinion, because if you bid everything on a name, which in the case of .gin, I bid my entire wallet at the time, my entire balance that I had to win that, because I also had some painful experiences where, I bid something on a name, or let's say I opened up an auction at 1 HNS to a couple of cents, and I wanted to see how things went. And then I ended up putting a slightly, higher bid in, maybe a couple hundred HNS. And then somebody came in and sniped it at the last second or something. And I had more left. I could have done more. And I realized after the fact, oh man, I'm going to really regret that. That's really awful. And so I didn't, think about are you going to regret not having this name? How long is that going to haunt you? Because there's a couple of names, I'll see industries or something on a billboard and oh man, that one slipped away. .hvac and .cairo are two that come to mind for me personally. But anyway, so figure out what it means to you and bid accordingly. I would also recommend not using round numbers. I actually recently lost an auction because I bid 500 HNS and somebody bid 512. And the human tendency in psychology is to use round numbers. And some of the smarter namers will recognize that and will put in completely arbitrary numbers to kind of counter against that. Or if somebody's adding a blind on, you could have, a very small bid with a big blind and someone will call your bluff. It's kind of like poker. and so, or in some cases, if you look at the .gin auction, somebody bid, there was a 0 HNS bid and a 2,000 blind, and then somebody else thought that may have been a real bid because it was a valuable name, and they put in 2,000 something, and I ended up bidding 3,000 something. So really by their bluff, they set a new floor for that auction and really raised the price of the whole thing. So these are all things that can happen within the auction. And I think a way to kind of cut through that complexity and ambiguity is to just bid your true bid, ideally a larger amount, focusing on quality rather than quantity. You don't need 1,000 names to be successful. You need one name that you're excited about and that you can convey that to other people and provide value from. If you can build value in one name, you've made it. Imagine owning .com and building that kind of value. You're probably not going to have that kind of market dominance in this, because where top level domains are plentiful, exact match and context is what is scarce. And so, what community are you involved in that you want to contribute to, that you can rally around? If you think about, .club, people are rallying around that extension because it's a community, and you can do the exact same thing here. So put in your top bid as early as possible, or if you want to see how things go, I personally don't go anything beyond the last 30 blocks. 30 blocks is kind of the minimum amount of time left that I'll put something in, or the last second for me, to make sure that it's mined in time by the network. If you put it in at the very last second, sometimes the bid just doesn't get processed in time. And I've had that happen too. That can be equally as heartbreaking as underbidding. So, put in your true bid, make it a random number, and do it either as early as possible or, 30 blocks or maybe even a day before the auction ends. And I think more often than not, you'll find that you'll have success with that.
And it's interesting that you say that, because the one thing that I did learn throughout all of this is time and timing. And so you mentioned with .gen that you pretty much locked up all your HNS on this one name. And so there's where, things quite differ. Obviously, in terms of domain investors are quite obviously used to building portfolios. So it's about the quality of the name, but to a certain extent for most domain investors, they're going to have a couple of hundred, if not a couple of thousand names within their portfolio. And that's not necessarily what the Handshake community really wants to actually bring over into the Handshake auctions. It's really about the usability, or rather, that's what I've gathered from just having been included here within the last, like I said, 10 to 14 days into the community. Is it's really about the usability. It's not about, hey, coming in, winning all these different streams and simply just kind of sitting on them in hopes of selling them. It's like, no, there is a play on usage, even so much so that I've seen more than a few players gift these strings to people. And actually you gifted me what was it, the AB emoji, or a variation, I guess, of it, right?
Yeah, it was a variant of that. I think I saw that one at market, or maybe I won the auction of it. I honestly don't recall. And I saw it in your profile and I was like, oh, like he's got to have that.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, and like there's some names, that people are paying hundreds of dollars to gift them to people with really no expectation in return, but then people have, they have a vested interest in it, like they have a solid handle, and I think the trend so far has been gifting to friends, family, and influencers. Yeah, the when Namebase issued the gifting feature, that was huge because I think it makes name transfers even easier than on the legacy side. And there's a lot of advantages, I think, to Handshake Domains that a lot of the legacy investors are enjoying, like instant transfers. When you register a name, you can immediately put it up for market. If somebody makes an offer on it and you accept it, there's no such thing as like a fake offer. Like it has to be collateralized and it has to go through, and so it goes through instantly. The negligible renewal fees every 2 years instead of every 1 year for cents that go to the market and not to an individual company or individual. And so I think that, yeah, there's a lot of really awesome benefits to Handshake, and they're going to continue coming out as more developments are made.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the thing about time, because one of the lessons that I picked up on that I mean, I guess I realized it, but didn't realize it. And like I said, this is where it's different than legacy domain auctions, obviously, because we're bidding in the real time in real minutes, versus if, like, let's just say I take something like that D in Dallas that I had, and it's available. Well, obviously I can bid now, but essentially kind of walk us through the time, because it's not that you bid on it and then like a day or so later, you figure out that you win it. I mean, we're talking about sometimes 15, 20 days that you could be possibly locking up HNS for a given stream.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of the bidding process as well. So we didn't really touch too much on that yet. So the auctions are a Vickery style auction, which is a bit different than auctions that most people think of. I think the most common auction format is, the price keeps going up, highest bidder wins. In some cases, you can have a Dutch auction where the price keeps going lower until somebody accepts the price. And a Vickery style auction is particularly unique and elegant because it's a blind auction. So you don't actually know for certain what each of the bids are. Although because we can't have true blinding on a blockchain, a public blockchain, because of the transparency, instead there are blinds. So you can have, an initial bid and then blind it to whatever degree, which I touched on a bit earlier here. And that period for people submitting bids is 5 days. And then you're right. After that, there's a reveal period. So folks that are using Bob Wallet, the custodial option, have to manually reveal their bids. And importantly, if they don't do that, that HNS is locked up forever. And there's been a couple of instances where some folks have lost some pretty significant amounts of money doing that, which is basically free deflation for everybody else. But it's kind of like if somebody lost the keys to their Bitcoin wallet. So that's one of the other things, if you're newer to the Handshake space using Namebase, they do that for you automatically, no further action required. And so you don't even have to worry about that being a possibility. But after the 5-day bidding period, there's the reveal period, which goes on for 10 days. And you're right, the bid amount that you put in, so whatever your skin in the game was, is locked up for basically 2 weeks. And that's a really important function, because that means that even if somebody does have a ton more Handshake than you do, they can't just go around and like vacuum up all of the names, because especially if they're going for some valuable names and they put in some big bids, there's going to be that lockup period. And so I actually found, especially in the earlier days, and I think this is still valid to a degree, is if there's a really competitive auction where some whales are bidding on some big amounts on this name, then that your probability of winning the auctions in the next week or two is a bit higher, because of all of that is locked up. But any blind amount, so whatever cover you added to it to obscure what your true bid was, will be returned to you pretty quickly, usually within about the next day or so. And so that's another consideration that you need to make, is what other names are coming up in the near future in the next week or two that you're going to need some of your liquidity in your wallet to bid on. And so you really have to make a calculated decision on what name is most important to me and why. And that really circles back to really knowing what is your community, what is your niche, what is your perspective, and doubling down on that.
Yeah, because if not, like I said, man, that can be a costly experience, because the other side of that is you don't necessarily know when, or no one necessarily knows when a given keyword is going to go into auction outside of putting it in auction themselves.
Right. And I mean, at this point, all possible names that are going to be available are available, but there are still a lot of names, very valuable ones, that have yet to be opened. I know this because I, myself and other people in the community, have hundreds of names that we haven't opened the auctions for, but we have them on our watch list at Namebase or in Bob Wallet, and we're watching those, and we've seen that nobody has opened those, and we're choosing to wait until an ideal time. In this case, when people think, oh, the first year is over, that all of the good ones are gone, they pay less attention to that. I mean, for a while there, especially in the first few months, or actually midway through the year, over the summer and into fall, when we were gaining a lot more users in the space, people were watching every single name that was coming across, and sometimes somebody would literally upload a dictionary of terms and just bid on, like, have a bot or a script that bid on all of them, and people would read through every single one, and maybe that they would try to snipe them, because most of the time with that kind of scale, they were only bidding a few cents on each one, knowing that nobody could possibly they're going to have a disproportionate win rate regardless, because nobody would be able to bid on all of those. So you could kind of pick out some gems out of those. But yeah, I think that there's still a lot of really great names, probably some of the best names out there that still haven't been thought of, or terms that aren't culturally relevant yet, things that haven't even been invented yet, that will have valuable context, that are technically available, but they just don't exist yet. And so that there's going to be a lot more opportunity in the space for years to come.
Yeah, it is interesting. And it's like I said, I've been just really amazed just by the community itself, in terms of gifting, just in terms of the names. Now, I know that probably listeners are sitting here listening and they're like, okay, man, this is all good and all great, but I just know that there's some people out there with some questions like, hey, so what actually happens to my USD that I convert to HNS? Like, where does that go?
Yeah, I mean, like when you convert it into, that's going into the market. I believe, I'm not sure on the specifics of that. I think that in this case, that would go into the pool at Namebase for the market. It's basically creating liquidity for other transactions. So if somebody wants to cash out, Namebase is an exchange for that. And so when you convert your USDN, that gets pooled with their pool of handshakes, so people can trade accordingly. But when you bid on a name, like let's say you win your name at auction, when you pay that handshake, that doesn't actually go to Namebase or any other entity. That gets burned by the protocol. So that handshake is no longer available. And so handshake is constantly deflationary, meaning that the supply every day is going further down. And most of the supply, so there's about a 2 billion initial supply, and about 60 or so % of that was allocated for free and open source developers. So if you had a GitHub page, I think you had 14 or 15 followers prior to, or as of like February of 2020. I don't have the specific date off the top of my head, but essentially you can claim a airdrop for free of, I believe at this point, it's several $100s worth of handshake. Similarly, if you have a .com or another site that's within the top 100,000 sites for, as ranked by Alexa, you have that domain that is blocked off for you, along with an allocation of handshake. And ICANN, the entity that regulates the current root zone of the internet that we mentioned before, also has a rather significant allocation of handshake for them as well, along with all of the current top level domains that are reserved for them. So like you can't have a .com on handshake because it already exists. You can't have .facebook or .google because they're obviously within the top 100,000 of Alexa. And that's by design so that this is as retroactively compatible with the existing internet as possible. It's not trying to replace everything as much as it is trying to expand it and make it more equitable for the average person. To that end, you could, if you're not, if you don't want to put in the effort of hunting for valuable names or, setting up a website like Namesake.Domains and marketing the names and going through all of this, you could very well just buy some handshake or even buy some of the second level domains at gateway.io very easily, sit on it, or, develop the names or sit on the handshake. And because it's needed to update DNS records and because it's constantly burned by the network in auctions, it's kind of a no-brainer investment to me personally.
That makes a lot of sense because I know that folks are going to be like, all right, wait, where is the money going? And what does it mean to burn HNS during auction? Like, what do these terms mean? So, no, that definitely, you described it well and gave great clarity to what it means to burn, as well as where does the money actually go. Now, an interesting thing in terms of speaking of money, there have been a few sales that have happened. And so I think it was like .nft, and then I think I saw Morgan Linton wrote about 3 hours ago about, I guess, the string journal sold for approximately over $9,500, something like that. Now, the question that I have there is, in terms of selling these strings, if you will, what's the math on that? Does the seller, I guess, is there a certain percentage charge to the seller, or does the seller get the full 100% of HNS?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's a space that's really heating up right now. Now that, again, we have the first year of issuance of some of the top level domains, and like all available combinations are available. People that, have several of them want to recoup some of their costs by selling a couple of them, and that will help them to, of course, get higher quality names as well, or to, at the very least, recoup their costs. So currently the main option for selling names, in my opinion, is the Namebase secondary market. So you can, if you have your name at Namebase, you can list that for sale. Namebase does take a 3% transaction fee from that, and that is calculated right in the data. You don't have to do any of the math. You can just type in what it'll tell you what you want it for, or what you bought it for, and then you can type in what you want for it as a buy it now price. and it will tell you what you'll actually receive after the 3% fee. So you don't need to do any of that math. And then you can also check off a box for make an offer. So a lot of the names on the marketplace have, kind of obnoxiously high prices. And that's not to say that somebody actually is expecting to receive that price. That's basically a parking page. Like there is some other secondary kind of parking pages. It's Sympapalis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was created by a community member. And so you can kind of park some of your names there. But with Namebase, most of the time people will, if they want to kind of remove it from their portfolio just for filtering options, they might set up that price because it goes into a separate folder that way for sales. But yeah, you can make an offer on that, negotiate back and forth with a potential buyer, and included a description within that. And most of the sales have been done that way, and each of them are publicly reported both on Namebase, and there's also a Twitter bot that will share that out. I'm not recalling the name off the top of my head, but if you follow me at Namesake Mark on Twitter, I retweet some of the top 3 highest sales of the day pretty frequently, so you can find it that way. But yeah, that would be the primary way to go about it. Now, you mentioned .nft. Well, actually, let me back up. The first biggest sale that really got the community excited, and I think really kicked that off, was .xx. That sold for, I believe, approximately 20 something thousand, 22,000, 28,000, somewhere in there, USD worth of Handshake, which I believe was over 100,000 Handshake at the time, and that was done via the market.
Wow.
The Namebase market. So they were paid out in Handshake instantly. The transfer took place instantly. .nft was a unique case. That actually came up in our Clubhouse room, and I think you were present for that, if I recall correctly. And that was an exceptionally exciting discovery because that was the highest sale after that, which was nearly 4 times that. It sold for, I believe it was 82 or 84,000, if I recall correctly, somewhere in there. But that was done by escrow through Namebase. That was kind of a unique situation because it was actually an investor in Namebase, or an investor of Namebase, that contacted Namebase to set up the escrow transaction. So that was a bit more involved. It's not a formal service that they offer at this time that I'm aware of. And if I remember correctly, that ended up being settled in USDC, which is the USD stablecoin on Ethereum. But I suspect that there will be more independent marketplaces that come up. And in fact, I've been speaking with some people and considering setting up kind of a blind escrow service where, the buyer nor the seller know who the other is, but then I'm able to set up an escrow transaction that way for some premium names under the Namesake Domains brand. So that's something I'm considering doing, and I'm sure that others are looking at that as well, especially because I recently ran a poll on Twitter. I believe out of approximately 40 people, over 56% said that they would rather have one premium top-level domain than one Bitcoin, which I thought was really interesting. And so
Wow.
I think that yeah. Well, and again, it's you were talking about earlier that many legacy domainers have thousands of names, and that's because those are singular names. They're single instances,
Right.
of a .com. When you have senior care, that one name that you had is essentially like having the largest legacy domain portfolio there is already. You could have every single state, like Texas.seniorcare, and then have a whole page of that. Or you could have a specific brand for that, like Evergreen Senior Care or something, have a specific brand name. And so
or even cities.
Exactly. City, state, like you have so many contexts that you can use within that you don't. Honestly, if you diverted all of your attention and resources to that one name and built it out, and Handshake, gets greater browser adoption, so on and so forth, continues growing into the same utility or more than the current legacy space, you wouldn't need to do anything else. You could probably do it just on that one name. But I'm sure that you have more in other interests and other names. And so that's why I think that it really just having even a few names, like 3 to 5 even tops on a single site, and you can very well launch a boutique service, especially if they're all in the same relative niche.
That makes total sense. And the thing that's most interesting about just all of this and all of the space that we find ourselves in is in regards to, obviously, we're seeing some of these sales. And so the thing that's been interesting to me is watching the change, because I think, like, I started and it was like .12. And so to see it at .19, now where I'm going with that obviously is like in terms of folks using the marketplace, I guess it's really we're in a season of really there probably large fluctuations. And what's so interesting about that is the simple fact of coming back around to if you're going to set your price and forget that and kind of walk away, like anything can happen. So you could set it at something. I think Morgan Linton set his at something like I want to say 9 million HNS or something. I'm like, dude, nobody's gonna buy that. Nor is he really trying to sell it at that. But that being said, it's kind of one of those things because I've seen certain ones. I picked up one that was like 30 HNS, purchased it, and then I had a list of others that I was going to pick up, and then I looked, and I'd actually so I keep a spreadsheet of the string, the HNS, whatever that HNS value was, and whatever the date is, and then I come back to it. Well, in some cases, those strings had sometimes tripled or even quadrupled in their HNS ask. And I was like, whoa. And so it made me think like, man, when you see it and you actually have a good plan for it, like you probably don't want to wait on that. You probably want to, you probably want to go ahead and get it if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some really handy tools on the Namebase marketplace too to be able to sort through that. Mike within the Namebase community goes by Sky Include. He's on a lot of our Clubhouse calls as well. He's the one that records those, but he shared out last night that he will set, like the puny code option for 9 digits or so, accounting for the XN dash. And then after that, you should have a shorter string. And so 5, maybe 6 characters. And so if you set it at 9 or 10 characters as the max length, and then set the option for puny code, the odds of you getting like the official emoji are greater because there are multiple emoji versions. And that's a whole other kind of conversation in that emoji top level domains. Like we've had emoji domains before with .ws and other codes, but emoji top level domains are a completely new asset class that are coming up on a year old with the Handshake system itself, because it's the first place that they've ever been possible. And so you can have literally just a standalone emoji. In my case, I own the both of the newspapers. And so if you go use Puma browser on iOS, you can just type in the newspaper emoji / and it'll go to a D-Link that I set up with a bunch of different crypto news sites. And so I think that it's really fun to be able to use that to set up, aggregated or curated content for what they represent. But getting back to the marketplace bit, though, there's a ton of opportunity to find names by filtering through, setting a max length of 3 character and maybe setting the top price at 500 HNS or so, which I think is around $100 right now. And you can find some three-letter names for around $100, which is just mind-boggling. I mean, you can barely catch some dropped auctions for a single .com for that, and here you're getting a 3-letter extension that essentially is expanding on the .com meme of having a .3 letter. And in some cases, if you then Google that term, especially Googling it with .com to see if there's anything with that acronym, you can find some really interesting context. I think I bought one for a few dollars, EYH, and I Googled it, and it turns out that the SEO for that is squarely for expanding your horizons, which from what I can tell so far is an organization that helps middle school and high school girls get into science and technology. And I thought that that's a really awesome use case, and I'm going to be reaching out to them to offer use of the name to issue an unlimited number of sites to girls that want to learn how to develop them.
Definitely, because I was able to pick up because it was interesting. I learned about the whole HNS lockup, so I learned my lesson because I had tied up funds and others, not realizing that it was going to be a 15, 20-day ordeal. So I had locked up HNS on some other strings just to realize, oh, yeah, well, you don't even have enough to actually bid on your own name. And by the way, it took, I think I did it over a weekend to transfer funds, and it obviously got there, and I was just like, oh, man. And so I said, I'm not even going to bid on it at this point. Now, fortunately for me, it worked out because Christopher Moore actually bid on it and gifted me my name. And so we're still waiting. He's still waiting for it to land in his account. But I'm grateful for that. But I'd already actually made another plan whereby I actually saw AWB, which are my initials, and I wound up purchasing that for 466 HNS, which, I'm like, well, that's actually not bad, especially if we start looking years down the line of we'll look back and go, oh man, you paid what for that? 466 HNS? That's not bad. Especially kind of going back to the emoji domains. Like, wasn't it? I think it may have been you, or maybe I saw it in the marketplace. Like some of these things are listed for like 40,000 HNS. Am I tripping, or did I dream that up?
No, that sounds about right. I mean, just most recently off the top of my head, the rainbow emoji, the top bid for that was 25,000 at auction. And I mean, secondary is obviously almost always multiples of whatever the auction bid was. I think they ended up getting it for like 16. Honestly, I'm kind of regretting not doing that. I think it came out to like, I don't know, what's that come out to? Like $6,000, something like that. But I mean, there's rainbow.me, the wallet, and then just the fact that it was one of the last emojis to be released over the course of the first year. It's a one of one. Like some of them have, like some of the people emojis have different skin tones. And so
Right.
it's not universal necessarily. Like you could still set up kind of a community under each one, but they're effectively a one of six kind of NFT. So, or, in the case of globes, like there's three or four different globes that have different sides of the globe. There's something like 10 or 12 different clock faces, different storm clouds. And so like really finding an inanimate object emoji that's a one of one, and that is like the only one of it, is pretty rare. And so for especially if there's some kind of cultural connotation or context around that, like the game controller went for quite a bit. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly, but yeah, it's not uncommon for them to go for, now anyway, for thousands of dollars for some of those one of one emojis. And I think that if you look at a lot of the history for single letters, I don't think there was a single one that went for less than upper 5-figure HNS or low 6-figure in many cases at auction. And some of them, I believe, have started reselling on the secondary market as well. And I think that because of the kind of ambiguity or confusion around some of the emojis and uncertainty of how they would end up playing out, I think that the market didn't really recognize the value of those initially, but they are effectively single character domains. And so I think that in the long term, those are going to possibly have even more value than some of the single letter domains, because they represent something very specific. They're language agnostic, and they're a top level domain on an immutable blockchain. And so like for the newspaper emoji, like I own both the newspaper and the book, or a stack of books. And I think that those have important context of being on an immutable blockchain, especially with the censorship that we've seen. And again, being language agnostic, I think that there's a lot of utility there for that. So I'm excited to develop those further. But I think that, it's going to be interesting to see how those play out. And even some of the alt emoji codes, if it looks like the same emoji, but the code is not the one that lives on every single device in the world, those may still have tradable value. I mean, there's still a single character top level domain. There's still a finite amount of them, certainly less than 10. And so I think that in the long run, those are also going to have some significant tradable value.
Certainly so. I mean, I'm looking at, some of these and I'm like, man, what in the world? It seems like pricing is changing, if not on a daily, it's certainly changing on a weekly basis.
Oh yeah, I mean that's any developing market. You're going to have volatility, and in this case, things have really been lining up really well for Handshake. I mean, as much as I don't like seeing the turbulence that we have in the world right now, or a lot of the events that are happening, like the deplatforming of various people and platforms or apps that have been deplatformed, regardless of whether or not I agree or disagree with them. It's the precedent, I think, of free speech in general and how we culturally are handling that, and also the censorship of money, really, like with Robinhood ceasing trading in some cases, with GameStop and other things. Like these have all pushed the average person into the awareness of the need for decentralized systems and decentralized infrastructure that don't have critical or central points of failure. And so I think that has certainly piqued people's interest, and especially people that are already in the crypto community, domain community, have started taking notice that there may be more value here. And then when you compound that with some of the record-setting sales that have been shared from .xx to the .nft, which is still the highest, at least announced. And then today, as you mentioned, Journal selling for just shy of $10,000. I think it was actually just shy of 50,000 HNS, if you wanted to note it that way.
Right.
That's going to set a new floor. And so I'm especially excited to see Journal having that kind of attention, because that I think, again, has a lot of unique value because of the context of what the domain is itself, not necessarily just the term and how it could be marketable that way and complete, a brand, but the fact that the domain itself could lend value to whomever is journaling or issuing news on that, because it can't be taken down.
Yeah. When I think about just everything, I'm like, man, it makes me think of the phrase "for such a time as this," that Handshake Domains have come along in just like you said, I guess you'd say the upheaval and just unrest that we find, where one day you're on, and I mean, we're truly living in a day of the cancel culture. Like, Mark's on today, but he could be canceled the next hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And while that is a really valuable component to it, personally speaking, I find a lot more value in the narrative of equity, distributing the equity of this critical infrastructure to other people, and offering the opportunity for someone like me, which I consider myself to be fairly average in terms of my ability to enter this market. I didn't have extensive domain or crypto knowledge beforehand. I wasn't exceptionally wealthy or anything getting into it. I didn't have a lot of those advantages, other than really understanding what it could be and believing in that, and acting accordingly with what I did have. And I think that is personally my biggest takeaway, is that it opens up a ton of possibility for other people. And also with the emoji domains, I think they're just fun, kind of following, I saw somebody refer to it as Elon's razor, which is the most entertaining outcome is the most likely. And that's I think a really apt observation, and why I'm long emoji names, because they are the most entertaining. One of the big emoji sales, one of the higher lockups, and I won't quote amounts because I don't remember them specifically, but it was the diamond emoji. In the late fall of last year, the diamond emoji was one of the top lockups or bids that we had ever seen. And a week later, or less than a week later, the poop emoji outdid it. And it was I don't know, it was just super entertaining and kind of ironic that those would be the two that were juxtaposed or compared to one another. And ever since then, really ever since those couple and I started tweeting about it, I don't know if I had any material impact on the emoji market or not, but they've definitely been taking off since then.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, I've certainly noticed how well they've been taken off, just in terms of perusing the marketplace for opportunities and whatnot. And so in terms of what's next for Handshake Domains, where do you see things going? Obviously, we had things surface this week in terms of, email, but where do you see things going in terms of, I know that the Puma browser is out there. I know we have resolvers that are out there, but will we ever see Chrome, Mozilla, Firefox? Will we ever see, Handshake Domains go mainstream, or what's the likelihood that they do go mainstream? And I'll add in there, how does that also impact ICANN?
That is the $1 billion question, isn't it?
He's like, initially, time will tell. Time will tell.
it absolutely will, and probably less time than a lot of us think. At least I certainly didn't expect the developments that we've had so far. I mean, the decentralized link tree with Namebase putting out that product, and the email, or at least proof of concept of an email coming out within the first year, having Puma browser, a native mobile native browser for both iOS and Android adopting it. These are all strong momentum signals to me. And I think it will be a continuation of that. So I think that we'll see more browsers adopting Handshake or natively resolving that either by, a toggle switch as an option to resolve them or just it just works out of the box, especially as more of the community starts getting engaged with names. Like as we see more people building on Handshake and a lot more market activity, that will increase attention within the network. That attention will then attract browsers to adopt it so that more people use them as their primary browser. And then once we get a couple of more browsers using that, and again, more of an ecosystem developing and finding greater product market fit for the names themselves, in much the same way that we saw with .finance. .defi with Handshake is doing kind of the same thing, or finding the same success that .finance did with decentralized finance or DeFi over the summer. From there, I think that when we have a good ecosystem of like privacy focused or crypto focused browsers, and the crypto and domain community has a successful ecosystem evolving and a lot more attention and interest in the space, then there's going to inherently be pressure for the incumbents to recognize that and adopt it. And so whether or not Chrome and Mozilla and others will adopt that, I honestly don't know. But I think that the best bet of that happening is from a grassroots organization and development. And I think as we get that, as that momentum continues growing, as people, continue embracing the gifting economy, gifting names to their friends and family, and building, fun. And at first it's going to look like a toy, right? That's how a lot of, really big developments start, is people just kind of memeing and having fun with it. And then we, especially with how things, as I mentioned, are going right now. Like there's already Footnote, which is like a layer 2 protocol. There's a rudimentary social network that's already built there. And, eventually when we have the email and other things, I foresee having an entire digital infrastructure that could be bootstrapped on the back of a single name. And I know that you've heard me mention that a few times in different Clubhouse rooms and things. But if you think about the American internet, it's essentially .com. Like that is effectively the country code for the United States. That's most of our internet is on there. And that's why a lot of the legacy domainers are .com maximalists, is because that is the default, the de facto name for the consciousness of our society. And so once there is, basically infinite number of top level domains, I do think that .com will continue to be kind of the ultra premium standard for the blue chip Fortune 500 brands. And we're going to see even more record breaking sales, really, to make a statement, right? It's a statement piece of being able to own that real estate. But I also think that we're going to be able to have, let's say you take, I own .htx, for example, for Houston, Texas. So we'll just use that as a city.
Oh, man, that's a good one, man.
Thank you. So if you think about that, like each resident theoretically, and it could be Houston, it could be a city in a developing nation, it really doesn't matter. But each citizen could theoretically be issued a second level domain, like alvin.htx, and that could be your website. Could also be a wallet for you, a human readable wallet to send and receive Handshake or other currencies to and from. You could have, Alvin at alvin.htx as your email address. .htx or just htx itself could be an open forum for the city itself. And so you have this like city open forum city layer. You have private email, you have instant messaging between different Handshake names, where alvin.htx is your username for that, or even your initials that you acquired, or whatever other username you might want to use for that. And so we start getting into decentralized identity and the interoperability of these names to really build an entire digital infrastructure for a region based on the context of whatever name it has. And in some cases, especially for developing nations, that could give them the opportunity to leapfrog from being an underdeveloped or developing nation into the new crypto paradigm, bypassing everything, the entrenched or centralized system that the Western world has built and adopted so far. And that might actually give them a competitive advantage for doing so, because we're so entrenched in our system that it's difficult for us to transition into crypto. So on a much longer time frame, I see these things playing out, especially as different regions in the world start to try to censor that. Like, there's been various regions that will shut down the internet to cease Bitcoin trading or to cease communications in general in terms of civil unrest. And so I think that this would be a really powerful and effective tool to help combat that.
I definitely agree. Now, what do you see on the front of like I was about to say NamesCon. Lord have mercy, NamesCon. What do you see in terms of ICANN? And so, there's the argument to be made, like, okay, well, what happens if ICANN releases new TLDs that then conflict with Handshake? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. That is also a concern that many in both communities have, name collisions, basically. And I don't think that that's going to be as much of a problem as many people think. It's kind of like it reminds me a lot, although it's on the periphery of my memory, frankly, of the concern around 2000, right? Like Y2K, that kind of thing.
What was that?
Like when
Hey, most of my younger listeners like, what did he say? Y2 what?
Yeah. So for context, a lot of people thought when the clock went to 00 for the year for a 2-year format, that a lot of ledgers or systems would break. And in some cases, there were companies that needed to do some significant digital overhaul to prevent things from breaking. So I mean, it's not to minimize the potential issues or collisions with that, but I don't think that it is an existential catastrophic scenario in which they can't coexist. I don't think that the namespaces are mutually exclusive. Like, Unstoppable Domains isn't going to pack up shop and be like, Handshake's here, like, we're not going to do Ethereum domains anymore. And ICANN certainly isn't going to pack up their everything that they're doing with the root zone because a couple of decentralized protocols exist and have new top level domains on them, or second level domains in the case of Unstoppable and others. So I do think, and now actually there's another one, I think it's like Butterfly Protocol. I'm like vaguely aware of that. Honestly, haven't looked too far into it. But point being, there are and will continue to be a multiverse of namespaces in the same way that there are new blockchains popping up almost every day. Some of them will thrive, some of them will die, based on Handshake being a fork of Bitcoin, being proof of work, and already being very well entrenched in the legacy system with partnerships with registrars, interest within both communities and the crypto community. I think that it will definitely be one of the protocols that thrives. And I don't believe that name collisions will be the issue that a lot of people make them out to be, because there's some really apt parallels to the current mail system. I mean, you can have a 123 Main Street in California and in New York, and there's not a collision with those because the context is totally different. They're in completely different states. And I think that browsers, as they evolve into the Web3 paradigm, will adapt to that. And actually, if you use Trust Wallet, there's a browser within the wallet itself on Android. At least I was dismayed to find that it's not on iOS. But if you go into the browser on Android for Trust Wallet, on the top right of the URL bar, there's a little symbol for Ethereum. And if you click on that, there's a whole drop down of different chains that you can search for different addresses on different chains. And I think that something similar like that, similar to that, will happen with other browsers. Like when you type in a domain name, if there is a collision, then it will ask you, okay, is this the alvin.htx on Ethereum or Handshake or the legacy web, and so on. And so or in some cases it will just automatically know, either based on your history of searches or what sites you go to, or just based on the format of the URL itself. It will know, oh, that's not, like, it's ending in a forward slash, like that's going to the Handshake blockchain, or it's ending in .com, that must go to legacy. So I think that browsers will help to relay that traffic in much the same way that the post office relays mail to different states with the same address. And again, ICANN has a vested interest in it. They have a significant holding. I think it's worth several $1 million at this point in Handshake. So really, the success of Handshake can be beneficial to ICANN. And again, I know that some people try to vilify the centralization of ICANN and equate it to central banks, this, that, and the other. Again, I think that both centralized systems have served a purpose and were absolutely necessary and will likely continue to be necessary in many cases for the infrastructure. But now that we have the ability to distribute that equity and decentralize the infrastructure, I believe that we do have a responsibility to do so.
Now, that's great. That is great. And I mean, you hit some things that it's basically, hey, the internet gets even smarter, essentially. Smarter, more intelligent. It takes a bit of predictability coming along because, like you said, if you are visiting a Handshake domain, well, based on your history, it should be able to figure out which path you're trying to take. And it also makes me think about in terms of, these strings that are just kind of sitting out there awaiting for, a bid to happen or to be purchased or auctioned, whatever. It's likely going to go, my guess is likely that there are going to be more and more and more Handshake domains that come out just because of the simplicity of the process versus the traditional, the legacy path of, well, I got to go raise $185,000 and we don't even know if that string's going to get in, or we don't even know if that string's available or going to be released. And if it is going to be released, then I got to, go raise funds to do all that. So it's not a one or the other, but a both to a certain extent.
Absolutely. And Handshake, because of how easy it is to create top level domains and how many domains can then be issued from each top level domain. I mean, you can think again of each Handshake name as being its own internet for all intents and purposes, because you can issue a practically infinite number of second level domains, each of which can have an equal number of subdomains, and then each level of those can all have a practically infinite number of pages on those. And so I believe the approximate cap of how many Handshake names can exist before things start getting a little wonky or breaking is something like 60 million top level domains. By contrast, we have 2,000 in the ICANN system. Even if ICANN started distributing names for free, or ENS, the Ethereum name service, I think by the end of 2021, Handshake will very likely have more registered domains than all current name systems combined in terms of top level domains. Certainly Ethereum name service, ENS, and Unstoppable Domains, I would not be surprised at all if even second level domains issued on all of those Handshake by the end of 2021 will have surpassed those. As far as individual second level domains within the ICANN space, that's going to take a bit longer. Obviously, there is a non-trivial amount of sites within that 20 years, but still, I think I would not be surprised if within the first 5 years we surpass all productivity for the last 20 years in terms of registrations.
And so wrapping up, what would be your advice, or where could people, I guess, start learning about Handshake and just getting involved in terms of the community? I know you mentioned you've been running a couple of clubhouse rooms, and so I'm assuming folks can get involved there. But I guess are there any other resources that come to mind that you just say, hey, if you're starting out or you're wanting to know more about this is where you should go?
Right now, I would say learn.namebase.io is one of the best resources for that. Obviously, Namesake.Domains, I'm going to continue putting out more targeted content to condense some of all of what we've talked about here today, which is quite a lot to take in, I realize, but I'm working to simplify that and create better content and talking with people directly on Clubhouse. And I also recently got access to Twitter Spaces and signed up for Soapbox, which is another voice-first app. So I'm really embracing as many voice-first solutions as possible because it's really helped to kind of prototype ideas, see what really resonates with people, and then go back and create content around that. So I'll be doing that at Namesake.Domains. I would also encourage you to follow me at Namesake Mark on Twitter. And I share a lot of either recent auctions that I've done, tips, tricks, that kind of thing. Any industry news or insights, as well as at Namesake Domains on Twitter. But I think if you're getting started, the learn.namebase.io is going to be the best bet at this point in time because they have a great resource of information there. And actually, there's a community member, learnhns.com, or you're a community member that built that. And that's another great resource that has more curated and aggregated content.
Well, that's awesome, man. And so with that, we're out of time. So Mark, hey, man, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your entrepreneurial as well as your Handshake experience, man.
Absolutely. It's been a blast. Thanks so much for having me on, Elvin, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Certainly. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks, and that's all for now.